Hello and welcome to the Complete Health Podcast, the podcast that brings you a complete view of healthcare, exercise as medicine, and much more.
We're your hosts, Helen O'Leary and Reece Noble, both physiotherapists at Complete Physio and Pilates in London.
This is episode 19, the second of our three-part chat with foot specialist physiotherapist Jane Baker. This episode focuses on how the foot functions during gait, including a case study on Reece's foot. During this, she touches on how the 28 bones and 33 joints of the foot are all interconnected.
Following on from this, Jane speaks about the forces the foot has to deal with during running and links that into why hopping is a key part of a return to running rehab program and the walk-run program that Jane uses to return people to running. A clinical gem that I will most certainly be adding to my kit bag and have used since we recorded this podcast.
And to finish off this wonderful episode, Jane sets out some handy tips for physios and other healthcare professionals out there on how to perform a basic assessment of the foot and ankle.
Good evening and welcome to the Complete Health Podcast. As you can probably hear, I am not Reece, but that's okay. He is sitting on the other side of the table tonight because we're going to use his feet as a bit of a case study. Ooh. So we are joined again by the wonderful, most beautiful Jane Baker. Thanks for coming again. And we, in the first podcast, talked about everything that is foot physio and what it involves. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at the foot in gait and what's normal, and then we're going to look at Reece.
Yes, that's exactly what we're going to do.
So, Jane, what happens to the foot in gait? What's normal?
Okay, so I think the amazing thing about the foot that is most important is it has a variety of functions. Mm-hmm. So the foot has to be a flexible structure and the foot has to be a rigid lever to be able to propel us forward through gait. Mm-hmm. So when the foot hits the ground, it's controlled by muscles eccentrically, lowering the foot to the ground. This is very simplified, by the way. And as it hits the ground, it becomes a flexible structure to get the big toe onto the ground, but also to shock absorb. Mm-hmm. If you don't have that capacity for the foot to unlock and absorb shock, that can lead to two problems. So muscle problems and joint problems. Mm-hmm. Once the foot has pronated to land on the ground, as the body moves over the foot, it has to supinate, become a rigid lever to be able to propel you forwards.
So that's so for all of those who aren't physios, pronation, supination. So we've got, as the foot comes through, the arch kind of flattens, if you like, and
exactly.
It sort of goes inwards, and then for it to go over the foot to then push off, it then turns outwards.
Exactly. So it's a subtle movement, but lots of people think, and particularly people who go into running shops to buy trainers, think that pronation is a bad thing.
Yeah.
Every foot has to pronate. It has to pronate to be able to get the big toe on the ground, to be able to re-supinate or go back and push forward. Mm-hmm. So we need pronation.
Yeah.
That's controlled by muscles in the foot, by the intrinsic and the extrinsic muscles. Particularly my favourite muscle, tibialis posterior, if those muscles are weak, so for example, if the foot pronates but doesn't re-supinate or can't, then we're going to have a strain on that inside part of the foot. Mm-hmm. So when I'm looking at somebody walking, it's great to video them actually, because then you can slow motion the video and you can see exactly what's going on. But you can see that movement of the foot from the heel through to the big toe and the push off. Mm-hmm.
So is that the reason, Jane, that everyone wears out the back corner of their shoes?
Theoretically, that's where they should, but obviously you are going to get people who are in over pronation and they're going to wear down the inside of the heels. Mm-hmm. Okay. So looking at footwear or heel wear, asymmetry between 2 feet or excessive wear gives you some degree of information.
So just to be clear, land rigid.
Yeah, you land on with a slightly inverted heel.
Yep. We soften as we pronate.
Yep.
To absorb shock.
Exactly.
And then as we go into the push-off phase, we re-supinate.
Yep.
To lock up the foot.
Exactly.
To become a rigid lever
to propel you
push
forward.
What a structure.
Simplistically.
It's pretty amazing.
That's
amazing. And you think about when you...
And how quickly that happens.
How quickly that happens, and when you run, the amount of load that's going through each foot. They say 6 to 8 times your body weight.
When you run.
When you run.
When you walk.
1.5.
So a lot.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of weight through your feet.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're going to deal with a lot. And if you're doing 10,000 steps a day, even if it's just walking, that's...
Absolutely. And what we always say with injury is you're looking at load and volume, and if you suddenly decide you're a normal 5k runner, or you walk 10,000 steps a day, and you suddenly do 20,000, or you decide to do a 10k run, you're doubling.
Gets annoyed and,
lots of things get annoyed.
I understand why.
For sure, So I will look at people in weight bearing, and I'll also look at them in non-weight bearing to test the function of their feet.
Yep.
So we could have a look at. Do you want to have a look at your feet?
Yeah. So my feet are a perfect example of
abnormal.
Which
is why I'm sitting here.
And what Jane's just explained about that ability to pronate, to get that first toe, first ray is what we call the first, the inside of your foot, to get that on the floor to then become that rigid lever to be able to push off through. Now my right foot doesn't do that very well, so you'll be able to see on the close-up camera there, my right foot here. So Jane, you can take it away.
Okay, do you want to pull your trouser up? So when I looked at Reece last week, he has done a little bit of work on his foot, which is great. When I looked at Reece, when he was in standing, he had quite a significant, almost banana-ing of, you might need to turn into, So his heel was very much in this position. So he was very tight through the medial side of his foot, and he was loaded through the outside. And what he wasn't doing in gait was being able to roll through the foot to get the big toe on the ground. And what was happening was his tibialis anterior was overworking, particularly when he was running, and he actually came in with a tibialis anterior pain. So when I assessed his foot, what I looked at was whether or not he could actually, you see, you're much better than you were, whether he could roll from supination into pronation, and he couldn't. So what we discovered is he'd had a injury of his deltoid ligament on the medial ankle here 6 years ago.
6 years ago.
6 years ago that he probably hadn't fully rehabbed. And so when I assessed the movement of his calcaneus, if you sit down, when I looked at his left foot, I could evert and invert his calcaneus. So there was flexibility through the medial column. And when I looked at his right foot, still really stiff.
You're working a lot harder than you.
So that, I'm actually getting movement. I could barely get any movement in that
That's tons better than my
calcaneal
legs.
eversion.
Is that stories? Or are you just putting a funny face because it feels weird?
I wouldn't say sore, it's uncomfortable. Yeah.
And so we did lots of release, or Reece was supposed to do lots of release through this medial ankle to get that mobility. And then in standing, he actually worked into rolling into that pronated position. And I have a funky walk that I get patients to do to try and get that mobility.
Yeah.
Have you been doing that every time you walk to the waiting room to get someone for you?
They might leave if they saw how hideous my organ was.
And then we also looked at his midfoot, and I assessed the mobility through the midfoot and discovered that his midfoot was very stiff. So if I look at this one, so if I go to the end of the first ray, find the medial cuneiform and drop it, I can get that rotation.
It's quite a big difference.
Yeah.
Massive, yeah.
And then I come back to this one. It's quite hard, so I need to do it really on a table.
So,
I'm having to work a lot harder to get that correct movement. So with the 28 bones in the foot, but 30 if you include the sesamoids, which are under the big toe, each one of those bones should move. So when I assess the foot, I'm looking to see whether there's mobility between, even the cuneiforms, is there mobility between those bones? And if there isn't, you can mobilise it to correct the function of the foot.
so we know that Reece is training for an Ironman, half Ironman.
I thought you were doing Ironman.
Yeah.
Nah,
What happened?
I haven't told my girlfriend yet that.
So obviously, if he's then running, how far are you running, Reece, at the moment?
Anywhere between 25 and 30 k's a week, probably at the moment.
Okay.
Well, up until I
Up until this happened.
hurt my foot. Yep.
Okay. So what would have been your longest run?
15.
Okay. So then,
15k.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's an interesting little analysis that I give patients when they are recovering from an injury and say to me, can I go running? So if you put somebody on a treadmill and you look at an average stride frequency on a treadmill, it's about 180 hits in a minute. So between 100 total, so 150 to 180, but let's say 180. That's 90 hits per foot per minute.
Yes.
Okay? So in a 10-minute run, that's 900 hits per foot.
With 6 to 8 times your body weight.
With 6 to 8 times your body weight. So you get patients who've rehabbed and they're walking up, they used to run, they've had an injury, whether it's plantar fasciitis or I don't know, Achilles issues or tib post issues, whatever. And they feel fine. They go, oh, I just want to go for a 15-minute run. And I go, well, you haven't even done any jumping or hopping or impact work yet. Yeah. And in 10 minutes, that's 10
times 90 times 80 kilos.
Exactly.
Times by 7, let's say.
So
it's a big number.
It's a big number, and even to me, every time I say it, so when I just had a patient who had a midfoot injury that we're rehabbing, and he got in touch with me during lockdown and said, oh, I can't go to the gym, I want to run. So I said to him, he'd been doing the jump hop drills, so I said to him, okay, you can do this really structured walk run program, and I have a really structured program that I use. And he decided to completely ignore that and start running 5k.
Right.
And did 3 or 4 and re-injured. And we started again, and he's now I just saw him today.
Now he's listening.
He completed 900 impacts in clinic today, completely pain-free.
Wow. So
now I'm ready for him to do the walk run program and build up impact and tolerance and endurance. And
so before you get someone running after an injury, you'll look at how many contacts they can do in a session with you pain-free to then get them running again.
Yes. Yeah. So I want to know that they can tolerate.
So it's not just 10 hops.
No. So I think one of the standards was they can do 30 single heel raises. This is if you look online, what do I need to do? Rehab from an injury. What's the criteria? And in some places, it's single leg balance for a minute, 30 single heel raises, and walk for 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then you can go for a run, but no criteria of how long that should be. And that's a minuscule prep for return to run.
I mean, especially if you think 30 minutes
only 1.5 times your body weight every time you're taking a step, it just pales in insignificance compared to the force that you're going to put through in a 5-minute run.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, what do you guys do with return to running rehab schedules?
Yeah.
Do you?
So mine's 10 single leg bounds, so be able to hop 3 times, repeat that 10 times, and control the landing.
Forward.
So triple hop.
Triple hop on one leg.
Right.
And be able to stick that last landing.
Yeah.
Be able to do that on multiple occasions, and that's normally where on top of a couple of other things, but that's where I generally tick people off to get to do like 30 seconds running, a minute walking, 30 second running, a minute walking, which regular runners absolutely hate. But now I'm armed with my statistics that you've just given us.
Everyone's in trouble. Who comes to see you?
That conversation's going to become a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah. So my return to running program, and I appreciate there's probably an infinite number of return to running programs, but the one I used was actually, we used to work for the military. It was one of my jobs, and it was one that we used there. And it's slow, but for the ones that you want a really structured program with, it's great. So it's basically a 30-minute program divided into 6 lots of 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. Each 5 minute is divided into a walk and a jog section. So for example, your first one would be 4.5 minute walk, 30 second jog for 6 repetitions to get you to your 30 minutes. So that's still 2.5 minutes of jogging, which is still like almost 2,000 hits. Yeah. Oh no, sorry, no, it's 90, 180, 250, still 250. Yeah. So it's still significant. Yeah. And then you basically repeat that session twice, and then you change in increments of 1 minute. So you do 4-1, 4-1, 4-1, 3.5, 1.5.
So each one you pull up pain free, you do 2 of those. Yeah. Progress to the next.
If you have pain, you go back to your
previous pain-free level.
But it's a really nice structured way, because if you say to somebody, right, you can go for a run, and they do 20 minutes and they're in pain, you don't know whether they were in pain at 2 minutes or 18 minutes. Yeah. So if you want super control over that return to run process, it's a great way of doing it.
I'm putting that well and truly in my toolbox, Jane. Thank you.
But like I said, there are infinite return to run programs with percentages and
so what would you say that they should all include? So for clinicians listening who haven't got as much experience in the foot and ankle, what would you say every return to running program should include?
So they need strength. Well, if you want to go everything, they need mobility, they need strength, they need impact training, they need balance training, and then cardiovascular. You can't just send somebody out for a 20 minute run.
I struggle with a 20-minute run. We've established that in a previous podcast.
So going along that line, Jane, for the I won't say novice therapists, but for therapists out there that don't look at feet all day, every day, what are sort of the key points that you're wanting, or the people should be looking for, to maybe treat them that the foot might be an issue? Like, is there a specific set of mobility things or areas that you really should be focusing in on? What's a basic one that...
So I think that's a good question, and it's really interesting, because when you are looking at something in such detail all day, every day, that's quite interesting to step back and go, oh, what would the basics be? Because you just hone in on everything.
So for those of you that haven't listened to the first podcast with Jane, she went through super in depth about the things that she's looking at, and the list must have been...
And we literally ended with a list that made me and Reece go...
Yeah. So it's probably 30, 40 items on the list that potentially that you look at, and I'm sure there's others on those lists. Now, obviously, for us that don't have all of those in our armoury, where would you suggest people start? What are the big ticket items that they should be looking for in the feet?
So, ankle mobility.
Yep.
So that is ankle joint mobility as well as soft tissue flexibility, soleus and gastroc.
Okay.
So we all know the knee to wall test. So that's a good indication of if there's an asymmetry or if there's significant stiffness.
Yeah.
Now, is significant stiffness a problem? I've got patients who are probably 3 centimetre knee to wall consistently, but they're pain-free, they have no issues running, it's not a problem. But you also might get someone whose their normal is 14 and they've come out of an ankle sprain and the other ankle's 3, that's a problem. So you want to look at symmetry obviously as well. So ankle mobility, calf strength, can they single heel raise? If there's a tibialis posterior problem, one of the key tests is can they single heel raise? Obviously it's a calf test as well.
Yeah. So where do you draw the line between the two? How do you differentiate between it being a calf and a tib post issue?
So if it's a tib post issue, there will be no calcaneal inversion. So basically, as they calf raise, the calcaneus doesn't turn in.
Right.
Which is the function
at the top
of tib post.
At the top.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if it's a tib post, if it's a tib post issue, they can't even get off the ground.
Yeah. Through pain or just through motor?
So either pain or complete dysfunction.
Yeah.
Balance. So single leg balance. Eyes closed. So again, I always say to patients, when you go out for a run, when you test someone single leg, eyes open, they're using visual feedback to maintain that balance. You're in a structured environment, you're in a safe environment in clinic. So it's the easiest place to test single leg balance. When you're out running, you're trying not to get run over, not to run into people, avoid that person with their head down on their phone.
A couple of distractions.
So you are relying on feedback from joints, muscles, ligaments.
Yeah.
So can you balance in a chaotic environment? Can you balance with your eyes shut? What's that proprioceptive feedback?
Yep.
So that's another key one. And then coming down into the foot, does the big toe move? And do they have toe function? So can they actually move their toes? I'm not a huge fan of picking up marbles and picking up tissues because it's a extrinsic muscle function as opposed to intrinsic.
Okay.
But it's a good place to start. Can you curl your toes and move your toes? Can you wiggle your toes? And those are probably the basics.
Yep.
I would say.
Okay.
And obviously screen the rest of the body.
Excellent. Midfoot stiffness. How would you go about assessing it?
So a couple of different things to look at. You can look at plantar fascia flexibility because that will influence midfoot stiffness, or you can actually palpate and mobilize the midfoot. So it's a very gross, simple way of doing it is to twist the foot and see whether the foot moves. But that is quite a gross way of moving the foot. Otherwise, you're actually getting into the individual joints and mobilizing the individual joints. Because it's very easy when you mobilize a midfoot just to wiggle the metatarsals around. And you think that you're mobilizing it and you're actually not. But it's really, I think what I would really encourage with everybody, whether they're a practitioner or somebody in the public just listening, is touch your feet. Get to know your feet. Give your feet some attention because they're so neglected. And like I was saying in the first podcast, there's over 200,000 sensory nerve endings in the feet, and they respond to touch. So when you have a bath or a shower, put lotion on your feet. I caveat that with, please don't put it on the bottom of your feet and slide
on the tiles.
So the hilarious thing is every patient that I see who I treat their feet has their feet washed before they get off the table, because I'm completely I just have this fear that they're going to have slimy, oily feet, and they're going to get off the table and go flying. So always, I clean their feet with water and dry them. So
in my head, I just had an image of you just like rubbing my feet and then washing them afterwards, thinking how lovely that would be.
Luxury spa day. Watch out. So I think that the take home messages there out of that are your feet deal with a lot of force, and it's important to look after them.
Yes.
Graduated return once you've been off for any injury.
Yeah.
Not just foot injuries, but graduated return to high velocity stuff like running is really, really important.
Yeah.
Because you're playing with fire if you just go back to things way too quickly.
Yeah.
And then for the clinicians out there, ankle mobility is super important.
Mm-hmm.
First toe mobility.
Yeah.
Midfoot mobility.
Yeah. I mean, I can't say that nothing's important.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
But compare one to the other.
Comparing one to the other,
Yeah.
and then your strength, looking at the strength
and balance,
and strength and balance.
Yeah, and balance is the components of proprioception, input from joints, ligaments, also visual, vestibular. I mean, we could do a whole podcast. We should do a whole podcast on balance.
That would be.
Oh, we totally could.
Yeah.
We'll put that on the list.
Put it on the list.
Excellent. So if you can, for the clinicians out there that are listening, if you can get some knowledge around those areas, you're a lot of the way there.
Yeah.
And of course, if you're not getting anywhere, refer to Jane. She's fantastic. Having referred a number to her, she's very good at giving feedback and referring back.
Really happy. Yeah, love just teaching people about their feet and we'll refer the patient back because.
So how do people get in touch with you?
So either through
us,
you guys, or the Gait and Posture Centre, which is number 20 Harley Street.
Okay. Do you have an email address?
I do.
People can.
Jane@janebakerphysio.com.
That's an easy one.
That is an easy one to remember.
Yeah. Are you on social media?
I am. I'm on Instagram mainly.
What's the handle?
That's a good question.
JB Foot Physio, isn't it?
I think it is.
JB Foot Physio. If you put JB
Not
Foot
that
Physio,
I Instagram stalk
Stalk.
anytime.
Jane has some fantastic stuff on there around some running drills and some self-love for your feet as well.
Self-love for the feet. I think that's the key thing. And again, like we were saying in the first podcast, particularly people who have foot pain, they seem to hate their feet.
Yeah. Interesting.
And just learning. I always say this to people: you need to learn to love your foot again, because they hate them. It's a real shame.
Really important part.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love a foot massage.
That's all I do, really.
And on that note, Jane is going to join us again in our next podcast, where we're going to go a little bit more condition specific and talk about wonderful things like bunions.
Bunions are definitely going to get a run.
That concludes episode 19 of the Complete Health Podcast. Another informative one with loads of handy information, particularly for the therapists out there.
In our next episode, the last of this 3-part chat with Jane, we speak all things bunions, including the causes of bunions, what can be done to prevent them, and when needed, what surgical interventions can be put in place for bunion correction.
If you haven't already, please pop back and have a look at episode 18 with Jane to get the full ins and outs of what a foot specialist physio is and the extremely wide range of conditions they treat.
For another week, stay healthy and goodbye.